Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith. Thank you so much for joining me as we take a look at the astrological forecast for the week of April 8th until April 14th. Now this week, Mars enters Aries. We have Mars conjunct Neptune, and we have that conjunction sextiling Uranus in Taurus, as well as Pluto in Aquarius. And to close out the week, we have Mercury finally entering Aries. So a lot of movement this week, a lot of aspects to go over. To start with, on April 9th, we have Mars entering his own sign of Aries. Now remember, he's been drifting on the ocean in Pisces without clear navigation, just riding the waves as they come up. He's been listening to his intuition and moving at a slower pace, or this feeling that he's just kind of along for the ride. And now, on April 9th, he's reached land. So Mars in Aries is now on shore. He's got his legs back. He is quick, decisive. He is confident, self-assured, and impulsive because he operates in the moment. Now, Mars has been in an ongoing sextile with Uranus in Taurus that will last until April 13th. And when Mars moves into Aries, he will also be in conjunction with Neptune, and that will last for the remainder of this week as well. So that conjunction will be exact on April 12th and 13th. Now, Uranus in Taurus has been actively disrupting our material reality, our values, our money, our sense of stability. Basically, our material world comforts are getting a shakeup with Uranus and Taurus. And because Neptune is supporting this by sextile, there is a higher purpose playing out here. Neptune represents transcendence, the ideal state, our higher self, and the journey that we are on back to unity. So if there is something in our material realm that is not in alignment with Neptune's higher energy, if there is something that is ultimately holding us back from being able to reach a higher state of consciousness, Neptune is working with Uranus in Taurus to reshape our material realm as needed to support our growth and evolution, to support us reaching a more ideal version of self. So right now, I would say we are not living our most ideal self with the wars and rampant illnesses, our sense of duality, unchecked desires, and this world that we know has been based on the story that we were taught and raised on, that we are separate, powerless beings who need to focus on surviving through competing with others. So that story and the world that was built on that story will not serve us for where we are going. So change does need to happen. What is not sustainable is now getting stripped away so that we can replace it with something that is sustainable. Neptune, representing unity and unconditional love, is a sustainable energy. And as our higher energy, we exist in that sustainable state, our higher selves. So as we move towards that, things will naturally stop existing, things will start falling away, we will start seeing more and more changes happening in the material realm. Now, Mars will be entering this dynamic on April 9th, where we can start to feel the energy, but that conjunction reaches exact at that 2 degrees on the 12th and 13th. But you can feel it building up until that time. So Mars represents desire, and desire is the energy of strife that separates. You can't desire something that you don't perceive to be separate and outside of yourself. So if you are something, you don't desire it because you know yourself as that thing. But it's during the experience of being separate from something that you begin to desire it. It's through that act of separation that causes the themes we see in Mars of action, motivation, desire, instinct, anger, conflict, and that survival energy. And because when we are experiencing ourselves as separate, we don't have access to the higher mind or our higher self that exists in a state of unity and love. And we don't have access to that higher mind and self that can guide us through love and intuition, and from an understanding that we are not separate and that you are ultimately safe. And because the separation creates the sense that we are not safe, our survival consciousness kicks in and we operate on instinct and impulse. Then we move toward our desires that keep us in a state of separation, and eventually we exhaust them, because as we discover more and more parts of ourselves, our external desires start to fade away. Buddhism teaches that beings are caught in samsara, which is basically a cycle of suffering and overall dissatisfaction. And that is driven by desires and attachments. And liberation from this cycle comes through practices like non-attachment and wisdom and ethical living. But this isn't to say, like, don't desire anything ever, because suppression never works. You have to move through it. You have to burn through it, burn it off. But it's just about understanding what is driving it and really understanding that the attachment to it is causing that fixed state of being in separation, right? Because it's not being integrated. Then you're attached to something that you perceive outside. So with Mars conjunct Neptune in Aries and sextile to Uranus and Taurus, as well as sextile to Pluto in Aquarius, we have a sense of wanting to transcend the physical body or transcend the lower survival instincts. There is a reevaluation around the sense of self here. So Aries is the quote unquote I am sign. And conjunct Neptune here, the I am is expanding. It's not so rigidly defined. There aren't really clear boundaries. And we are exploring a new sense of self, right? It's who or what am I? Who or what am I, really? And with the sextile to Pluto in Aquarius, our sense of self is not just as a separate individual. We have an awareness here of our sense of self being shaped by our collective experiences as well. Our sense of self evolves together with all of humanity. Your sense of self includes the family you were raised in, the community you live in, and being a human on this planet. So this is now deeply changing the rigid body self-perception in Taurus. And with Uranus here, there is a change in our values, in how we see ourselves as material beings. And Uranus in Taurus is not going to continue with the status quo. Uranus is disrupting the status quo. Uranus is asking Taurus, what do you believe you're worth? And Taurus' answer traditionally has been, well, the body image and the career, the financial stability, and the lifestyle. And Uranus is asking Taurus, with the help of Neptune, Mars, and Pluto, what are you worth outside of those things? How do you find your worth and sense of self without the help of your body, status, wealth, career, or any other socioeconomic condition? Now, we know that AI is actively changing our world as we speak, and everyone has different levels of comfort when it comes to the topic of AI. And I feel it's important to move forward consciously without playing into fears and extreme scenarios and just complete and total distrust. There is a book called The Last Economy, A Guide to the Age of Intelligent Economies by Imad Mostak, that I will link in the show notes, because he walks you through the history of how humans have associated our value within the economy. First, as our value equals our labor as bodies. Then, as machines replaced labor, our values shifted to our mind as thinkers. And now that AI is doing the thinking, how do we associate our value from here? And what does it mean to be human? And if we really think about spiritual teachings and the realization that the material realm is not fundamental, that we are not fundamentally a body, we are fundamentally something else that persists when the body is gone. And what is that? And we talk about that we know there is something beyond this physical experience, yet we are somewhat reluctant to search for our values outside of the physical experience. We look to the body, to our place in the economy, to our roles, our labels, and we search there for our value and our sense of self. But if we agree that those things are not the essence of who or what we truly are, why are we still looking to find our value within them? Now, I am absolutely not advocating for a pure tech world. I do think the natural material world is divine. But it feels to me like we might collectively feel unsafe in being supported. So we've been carrying a weight around for a long time that is the story of we need to, quote unquote, earn a living. We need to work very hard to survive on this planet. That's the baseline we almost unanimously were taught. And if you are familiar with the polyvagal theory, you will have heard that the nervous system regulates safety, and that safety is based on what it is calibrated to. And when it is calibrated to scarcity or threat, it can actually block receiving without realizing it, because receiving is not what it's calibrated to, and so therefore it feels unsafe. So we are calibrated to scarcity and lack, and having to prove our worth through production and consumption. So the thought of a more abundant world where we aren't confined to producing and consuming, can feel very unsafe because we are not used to that. And Pluto in Aquarius is recalibrating our collective nervous system, because collectively we are calibrated to what is familiar, and that is war, conflict, competition, scarcity, inequality, and survival. And Pluto in Aquarius is recalibrating our collective nervous system to hold more cooperation, equality, abundance, and peace. And of course, this has to all start within. If we continue looking without and focusing all our energy on affecting change without, we get stuck in the cycle, because it has to start within. And we know this, but we can work within our own lives to start to build capacity to hold these higher frequencies and actually start to feel safe in them. Right? We can actually feel safe being supported, valued innately, without attaching anything external to that value. Building our capacity for cooperation, peace, and abundance each time we are presented with a narrative that is demonstrating conflict, competition, and scarcity. Right? We can recognize that and consciously choose to detach from those narratives, not fund them anymore. Like, as an example, I catch myself anytime a thought comes up that attempts to separate me from someone that I love, for example. And that could be something as simple as, how dare they? How dare they? And if you catch that bid for separation, I simply refuse to allow that thought to perpetuate in my mind. So I will reinforce that I'm not interested in creating a conflict in my mind toward anyone, and that any thoughts which are seeking to divide me from my spiritual brothers and sisters are not going to be entertained. When the narratives come up about dividing, fear, competition, and scarcity, every time that we are able to rewire that, or to choose not to entertain that, we are rewiring our own nervous system's ability to hold more cooperation and abundance, and we are rewiring the collective nervous system to do the same. So this week, notice where there are thoughts that seek to separate and compete or create the illusion of sides, and try to work with that as consciously as you can and just see what happens. I can tell you from experience that it feels like detoxing. The more and more you can disrupt those narratives and consciously choose not to follow them because they want to be followed into a story, and the more you are able to choose not to follow them, they gain no traction and they're replaced with a higher perspective. And that feels like detoxing a bunch of bad chemicals from your body. You just feel so much clearer, lighter, and more free. Now, finally, on April 14th, we have Mercury moving into Aries after his journey through Pisces. And Mercury was dealing with the very abstract, intangible realms of Pisces. And now he's entering the very clear and decisive energy of Aries. So Mercury in Aries can be quite self-focused, so it's perceiving things very personally and subjectively. So I would keep that in mind, and it's especially good to try and consciously work with inner narratives and again interrupt those that are trying to separate. Mercury in Aries is also very quick, direct, and bold. So you can feel a sense of just being more clear around how you want to move forward. You can feel more decisive in your decisions. There's less humming and hawing and waiting as we have just moved through with Pisces. So there's initiative and action here, and actually a lot of Aries energy now that we have 5 planets plus Chiron all in Aries. So you will likely feel a sense of the pace quickening. Things are happening more rapidly than you might expect. Changes are occurring suddenly. Time feels like it's speeding ahead, and there's just an overall sense of drive and restlessness. So, because Aries doesn't do waiting. Aries is an energy that will continue to move forward no matter what. Nothing will stop Aries momentum. So expect to work with that Aries energy quite strongly over this season as these planets make their way through the sign. Now, I hope this resonates and is supportive for you on your journey at this time. Aries can be a fun energy to work with, and if you'd like to explore that more somatically, I do have an Aries Yin Yoga class available through my website at enchantedAstrology.ca. So if you feel called to, please check that out. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining me here today. As always, I will be back next week with another episode.